Hello everyone, just before I begin I'd like to thank Star Conferences for giving the opportunity to talk to you all today. My name's David Crisp, I'm autistic and I'm an international speaker and trainer. Today I'm talking about promoting happiness in autistic individuals from a mainly personal perspective. The traditional approach to autism is predominantly concerned with focusing on a person's challenges rather than build upon their strengths. Programs and services focus mainly upon eliminating or reducing socially inappropriate behaviours, rather than developing practices concentrating on promoting the person's self-esteem and feelings of happiness. It is therefore not surprising that so many autistic individuals suffer from depression and considerably more experience extreme anxiety and poor self-worth. As a late diagnostic autistic, I battled with clinical depression for many years prior to my autism diagnosis at the tender age of 42. This was due to the fact that I was unaware of the reasons for my difficulties with social communication and social interaction. However, like many autistics, I developed my own coping strategies, including masking to portray myself as perhaps more confident and self-assured than I was in reality. This presentation aims to open discussion about the benefits to autistic individuals of developing programs which promote happiness and well-being. This will be presented from my personal experience, reinforced by anecdotal evidence. The aim of this presentation is to stimulate discussion, provide an opportunity to consider autistic individuals from a different perspective, beyond behaviour management, to supporting them to live happier and more fulfilling lives. As W. Clement Stone says in this slide here, aim for the moon. If you miss, you may hit a star. Before describing how an autistic like myself can find happiness and quality of life, I will begin by considering how happiness and quality of life is measured in the field of autism. Everyone's goal is to be happy. Happiness is achieved by promoting happiness to others. That's from Russell Summers. When researching for this presentation, I was struck by how little attention has been paid to the emotional well-being and desired outcome for autistic individuals in the field of psychology. Traditionally, the effectiveness of psychological support and treatments are concentrated on improving cognitive functions, skills, and behaviours, especially social skills. However, does an increase in IQ and decrease in maladaptive behaviour and an improvement in social skills with a smarter, more skilled, less challenging, more independent individual equate necessarily to a happier outcome? Does improved cognitive functioning, education and adaptive function mean the individual is happier? Using these analogies, a good outcome means living independently, singly, or with a partner, being employed or in higher education, and having friends, whereas a very poor outcome would be having no friends, no independence, and needing high levels of care and support in a home or supported living environment. But does high levels of independence necessarily lead to better quality of life and happiness? Consider these two individuals. Matthew, not his real name and not his real photo anyway. He has Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism. He left university with BSc in astronomy. However, he did not succeed in finding a job because he finds interviews too difficult. Instead, he now packs items in a warehouse and is ashamed of this. He lives independently in a small flat where his only friends are fellow computer gamers who he chats to over the internet. He has very few dates with women, but his flat is unkempt, doesn't smell very nice. Apart from work, he rarely goes out and he worries what will happen when his mother dies, but feels very lonely and desperately wants a lasting working relationship. Let's compare him to the following gentleman. James. James is autistic and has severe learning disabilities. He needs full support with all aspects of daily living and lives with 5 other adults with disabilities at a small care home. He attends a day centre 5 days a week and helps to wash up in the kitchen and lay tables. He has a short attention span, needing regular breaks during which he can have a coffee and watch cartoons. At the care home, he joins in with some activities, but only if he chooses to do so. He likes trips out to the cinema, swimming pool, and local shops. He has very limited social network, but family visit every other day, and he calls carers my friends. According to most criteria, Matthew should have a better quality of life, as he is quite independent and is in full-time employment, whilst James requires 24/7 support. But who is likely to be the happiest of the two? Which one is happier, Matthew or James? Well, I would argue, and so would many, that James has a better quality of life because it's more rounded and he has more opportunities to socialise. Autism and the quality of life. Most research on autism and quality of life tend to focus on the negative impact of autism on quality of life. In 1968, in a follow-up study of the 11 subjects of his famous 1943 report, Leo Kanner, pictured here, found that only 2 of his original patients enjoyed even a marginal satisfaction with life. A report in 2001 entitled Ignored or Ineligible, The Reality for Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorders by Barnard and others for the National Autistic Society in the UK, surveyed 450 autistic adults through all levels of the autistic spectrum and concluded only 3% lived fully independently. Nearly 49% still lived at home. Only 10% could manage daily living tasks without assistance. And only 2% of low-function autistics were in full-time paid employment. And it's not much better for high-functioning autistics, which only 12% were in full-time permanent employment. 31% of adults studied had no social involvement outside the family, and 32% suffered poor mental health. In a later study in 2002 by Selzer and Krauss of 405 autistic individuals, 62% of whom were adolescents, entitled A Profile of Adolescents and Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorders, had similar findings. Of the total sample, only 22% socialised with family members and only 14% socialised with someone from school. 98% of adolescents had difficulty making friends, and only 95% of adults had difficulty making friends. Over 30% of adolescents had a comorbid mental health disorder. A further study by Baumanger and Kasari in 2000, entitled Loneliness and Friendship in High-Functioning Children with Autism, found it wasn't just the number of friends, but the quality of friendships that are predictive of satisfaction or loneliness for autistic children. Despite the common belief that autistic children prefer to be alone, the lack of intimacy, reciprocity, and emotional enrichment led to more intense and frequent loneliness compared to their non-autistic peers. Even when there was a structural social network at school, the lack of invitations to birthday parties, sleepovers, or games can have a profound impact upon quality of life. Future employability may be a better predictor of quality of life than academic achievement, even though some autistic adults complete secondary education or even university degrees, they rarely had contentment in terms of job satisfaction, independent living, self-determination, and social support. Indeed, although many autistic children successfully complete mainstream education, long-term employment remains low, even if they have the traits that employers find desirable, such as trustworthiness, punctuality, honesty, attention to detail. Often, the social component of work and adaptability to new work environments limit work satisfaction for autistics such as myself. For example, even though I would always have called myself a team player and very productive worker in every job that I have had, I've always found it difficult to fit into the social cliques that apply in the work-based environment. I have a very strong work ethic and consider work by and large as simply that, work. The social aspects of social positioning, chit-chat and gossiping are not what I've gone to work to do. Indeed, I have upset quite a few of my work colleagues over the years with statements like, oh, we mustn't let work get into the way of our socialising. Due to my tendency to be tunnel focused when working, this has made me perhaps, if anything, too productive, opening myself to bullying, harassment or intimidation and becoming a social pariah at some of my places of work. I've also had to mask a great deal in an attempt to fit in. Sometimes I've used humour as a defence mechanism or to hide my stress or insecurities. Social situations and environments can be extremely debilitating for autistic people, and traditional methods of supporting individuals have been on preventing or treating stress and mental health problems, rather than striving for well-being and asking autistics what makes them happy. In other words, we should try to promote happiness by helping to develop strategies that foster and increase positive feelings. Undoubtedly, autistics like myself are more vulnerable to stress due to social communication deficits and perceptual sensitivities. So how do we measure happiness in autism? When parents are asked what's the most important goal for their child is, the most common answer is happiness. Whether diagnosed as autistic or not, every parent wants their child to be happy. The challenge for professionals in the autism field is how do we measure happiness in autism? And how do we provide an environment that fosters happiness? Happiness is a subjective concept that's usually assessed through self-reporting using a tool such as the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire by Hills and Argyll, 2002. However, self-reporting of feelings can be very difficult in autism. Firstly, self-reports are useless for non-verbal autistics or those with significant intellectual disabilities, where the reliance is on observation by parents and carers rather than self-reporting. However, even amongst verbal autistics, self-reports are still problematic. Even high-functioning autistics may struggle to describe their own thoughts and feelings, and the terminology uses vague, abstract, or ambiguous words. Even the concept of happiness itself can be very confusing. When an autistic man was asked the question, "Are you happy?" he didn't know whether to answer yes or no. For example, if you have a bad day, does that mean you're an unhappy person? If you enjoy a certain activity, are you happy at that time? And how many positive events are needed to make a day a happy day? And how many happy days do you need to be happy with your life? Although autistics may find it difficult to recognize and differentiate their own feelings, in general, they can differentiate between a good positive feeling and a bad negative feeling. While some cannot easily describe happiness, they know what makes them feel good. Peter Vermeulen, in 2013, from Autisme Central, Belgium, and others have devised a way to help people assess their sources of good feeling and sources of happiness to improve the quality of life for autistic adults in 3 different ways: the Good Feeling Street, the Good Feeling Sensory Circuit, and the Good Feeling Questionnaire. I would certainly recommend this for anyone seeking to assess the quality of life of autistic individuals. I mentioned earlier some of my battles with depression and touched upon my masking and other coping strategies such as humour. It's not been an easy journey and I still have difficult days, but here are some tips of how I found happiness as an autistic or neurodivergent in the neurotypical world. It's not been an easy ride by any means. It began after my Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, as I had that eureka moment when my life began to make sense. By the time I was diagnosed in 2007, I'd been married for 12 years with 2 children, both of whom had been considered by their health visitor as likely to be autistic, although no one would assess them until they were older. Although my diagnosis gave us a foothold on the diagnostic journey. At this time, I was suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, or myalgic encephalomyelitis, or ME, and was on long-term sick leave for my job as a civil servant, and we were actively seeking explanations for our children's behaviour and concerns about socialising with our peers. This was a very difficult time for us, lots of struggling to get diagnosis for our two children. And this part of my story is for another time, but suffice to say, I was not in the best of places with my mental health. My diagnosis, though not a total surprise, made me reevaluate my life and paved the way for less masking and more being me. With support from some excellent occupational therapists, I quickly moved from the negative feelings of being inferior and think, there's me, there's everyone else, to being differently wired. This is why my company is called Wired for Autism. Simply put, us autistics are wired differently. We have a different operating system, neither inferior or indeed superior to the mainstream. After all, take computers. Windows and Mac may be different computer systems running different software, but neither is necessarily better than the other. Autistics now like to use the term neurodivergent to identify with other autistics and those with similar conditions to the neurotypical norm. I find this term very empowering, as though I'm a proud ASPI or autistic, it helps me to identify with a larger, albeit more diverse community. I think this helps us to move away from the combative labels of neurotypical versus autistic to a shared humanity. Shortly after I was diagnosed, I began to work with the National Autistic Society Adult Services, initially as a volunteer. And I was still recovering from ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, and later as a support worker, team leader, trainer, and speaker. At the time, while I was at the NAS, it was the first time in my working life I was fully able to be me, the real me. Although apparently popular with staff, I still found a better connection with autistic people I supported. And despite the fact that many were very intellectually impaired or nonverbal, I found communicating with them easier than my colleagues. Here, there was no ambiguity or double meanings. I've always been too trusting of others, and this led to some painful lessons. People don't always say what they mean or mean what they say. For a long time, I expected people to always treat me well because I believed that I always treated them well. So how did I make the change? I needed to make myself happier. Through life experience and self-awareness, by living my life, learning lessons as I went along, and by my wife, family, and closest friends allowing me to be, well, me. One of the biggest challenges I've faced in my life as a high-functioning autistic is to sometimes appear normal enough to be seen as normal, but not enough to be treated normally. So I've been bullied at school and at work over the years. Much of this because I was expected to behave and interact with my peers and try to fit in, and being too self-critical when I failed or felt I had failed. Being so late diagnosed, not surprising, as Asperger's syndrome wasn't first named until 1981 and not a formal diagnostic label until 1994. For the first 40 years of my life, I couldn't understand why I was often falling short of my goals and expectations. Diagnosis, awareness, and self-acceptance had to come first before I can make positive changes. Today, I'm able to make peace with past mistakes and missed opportunities and use my personal and professional experience to make positive changes and hopefully educate and inspire others. So to conclude, undoubtedly, we could all benefit by living happier lives. For some autistic adults, happiness has been considered secondary to behaviour management, leading to a lower quality of life and a feeling of self-worth. For professionals in the field of autism, there has to be a focus on the principles of positive psychology to concentrate less on the negative aspects of autism. Meaningful change is hard, slow to come, and is often achieved in the face of adversity, taking small steps over a long period of change. My life is by no means perfect, and I face many challenges too, but autism need not be a byword for unhappiness. If I can offer any advice to someone who cares for an autistic person, it would be to identify and allow them to engage in activities or interests that are meaningful to them. For some, it will be talking about their special interests to someone who will actually listen, or just allowing them to listen quietly to music through headphones. And remember, what makes one person happy may be unique to them. Sometimes a quiet, contented mind can be the happiest feeling of all. Thank you very much.